What if Balon Greyjoy offered Asha's hand to Jon Snow for a crown? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The Iron Islands do not look like a place that makes kings. They look like a place that breaks them. Pike rises from the sea on shattered stacks of black rock, its towers built atop pillars the ocean carved and the Greyjoys claimed. Arched bridges of cut stone span the gaps between them, and where the drops are sharpest, long swaying walks of hempen rope and wooden planks hang above the churning water far below. The oldest tower, the Sea Tower, stands on a crooked pillar at the castle's western edge, its base bleached white by years of salt spray, its upper stories dark green where the lichen has taken hold. It is not beautiful. It endures. In the great hall at the heart of Pike, with the wind pressing through every crack in the stone and the sound of the sea beneath them, Theon Greyjoy stands before his father and delivers a message that is not going well. He is young, lean from years at Winterfell, and dressed better than any other man in the room. He has Robb Stark's offer in his mouth, and he knows even as he speaks it that it is landing the wrong way. The offer is simple enough. Robb Stark, king in the north and of the Trident, will recognize Balon as king of the Iron Islands in exchange for the Greyjoy fleet and Ironborn swords. The north needs ships. Balon has ships. In theory, it is clean. Balon Greyjoy listens from his seat at the end of the hall with the expression of a man hearing an insult dressed up as a gift. "My son," he says when Theon finishes. "My son comes to me with a Stark's words still in his mouth." Theon says nothing. "Robb Stark will give me a crown." Balon says it the way a man handles something he finds offensive, turning it over slowly and setting it down. "A boy playing king in his father's armor sends a hostage to offer me a crown. As a gift." The men in the hall are quiet. They know their lord's tempers. "I took a crown once," Balon says, and his voice goes flat. "I paid for it in iron. I paid for it in blood. I paid for it in sons." He does not name them. He does not have to. Every man in that hall knows the names Rodrik and Meryn Greyjoy, dead in the fighting 10 years ago and 10 years cold. And now a boy on horseback in the Riverlands wants to hand me one because it suits his war. Theon starts to answer. Balon cuts him off. "I will not be given a crown. Not by him. Not by anyone." That is when the door at the far end of the hall opens. Asha Greyjoy comes in from the sea door. She has just come off the black wind. There is still salt on her jacket and a fresh scrape on her left hand that she has not bothered to wrap. She is lean and long-legged, dark-eyed, with black hair cut close to her head, and she moves through the hall the way she moves a rolling deck, like the floor might shift at any moment, and she has already decided it will not matter. She takes in the room in a single look and says nothing. She finds a place near the wall and she watches. Balon sees her come in. Something shifts in his expression. Not much. But Theon catches it. Balon looks back at his son. "Ned Stark's bastard," he says. "The one who took the black, the Night's Watchman." Theon has no idea where this is going. "A bastard has no name in law," Balon says. "No lands, no crown, no future. He is nothing by right of birth." He pauses to let that sit. But a sitting king can change that. A king can make him legitimate. Give him a Stark name, pull him off the wall, put a fleet behind him. He looks at Theon as if the calculation is obvious, and his son has simply not done it yet. "That is not Robb Stark giving me a crown. That is me making a king, my fleet, my daughter, my iron. That is the iron price." No one in the hall speaks. "Here is what I will offer your lord," Balon says. Asha's hand to Jon Snow. In exchange, the boy is legitimized and released by Robb's decree. He comes to Pike. He earns what he is given, and the fleet sails for the Lannister coast. He sits back. "I do not receive recognition from Robb Stark like a gift at a feast. I build a king, and what I build I have earned. Tell him that." Across the hall, Asha's face does not move. She is standing very still. Her hands are at her sides. She is not surprised, not exactly. She has known Balon Greyjoy long enough to understand that this kind of deliberate calm means the shape of something has already formed in his mind, and she is only now hearing it aloud. But her jaw is tight. There is something moving behind her eyes that she is keeping there by effort. She is angry, and she is holding it. And anyone paying attention can see the cost of that. Theon is paying attention. He has known Asha for far less time than blood should require, because 10 years at Winterfell left a gap between them that has not closed. He watches his sister decide whether to speak now or wait for something better. She waits. Theon turns back to Balon and asks for time. 3 days to carry the answer south to River Run. Balon grants it without much ceremony. The hall begins to move again. Men drift toward the walls and the outer doors. Theon gathers himself and walks toward the passage, and as he steps into the corridor beyond the hall, he hears footsteps behind him. Asha falls in beside him without being asked. They walk down the stone passage in silence. The sound of the sea comes up through the walls on both sides. Neither of them speaks for a moment. They have not spent much time alone together, these two, and the quiet between them has edges. "I am not a chest of gold," Asha says, "to be loaded onto a ship and sent to some man's cell on the wall." "He is not at a cell," Theon says. "He is a ranger. He is Lord Commander Mormont's own man." "He is a bastard off the wall," she says, "who your Rob wants to unwrap and hand to my father like a blade for the table. And I am what makes the offer sweet." Theon stops walking. He turns to face her. "I know Jon Snow," he says. "I grew up beside him at Winterfell. Whatever you think he is, you are wrong." Asha looks at him for a long moment. Her expression does not give much away. "You grew up at Winterfell," she says, "eating stark bread and sleeping under stark stone. That is exactly what I'm afraid of." She turns and walks back toward the sea door, and Theon watches her go and thinks about how he is going to explain any of this to Robb. Theon rides back into River Run 3 days later with Balon's answer in his head and no good way to say it. The castle sits where 3 rivers meet, its walls rising above the water, and inside it, Robb Stark has been running a war. He is 16, and he has won every battle he has fought, and he is still losing. The Lannisters do not need to beat him in the field. They only need to outlast him, and they have more gold, more men, and more time than the king in the north can match. Robb receives Theon in the war room with 2 of his captains at the table and a map spread between them. He is young in the way that wartime commanders sometimes are, which is to say he does not look his age at all and has not for some time. He listens to Theon without interrupting. When Theon finishes, the room holds its breath for a moment. "He wants Jon," Robb says. "He wants Jon legitimized and released from the Watch," Theon says. "And he wants the match formalized before the fleet sails. Asha Greyjoy as Jon's wife." Robb looks at the map. He is quiet for longer than Theon would like. "I sent you to bring me a fleet," Robb says, "not to trade my brother." "I know." "Jon took the black," Robb says. "He swore an oath, 'I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory.'" He says the words plainly, not from memory so much as from the place where a man keeps things he already knew were problems before they became his. "If I override that oath because it is useful for my war, every sworn brother in the Night's Watch will wonder what their oath is worth, and so will every man who swears one to me." Theon does not have an answer for that. He was not certain he would. That is when Catelyn Stark speaks up from the far end of the table. She is not a woman who enters a room quietly or leaves an argument alone, and she has been listening from the moment Theon started speaking. She is older than most people in this war room, and she has been alive long enough to watch what alliances with men like Balon Greyjoy actually cost a house. She has never been warm toward Jon Snow, and she has not pretended otherwise. But she is not arguing from personal feeling right now, and Robb knows the difference. "No," she says. Robb looks at her. "No," she says again, her voice flat and certain. "I have heard this offer, and I am telling you what I see inside it. Balon Greyjoy spent his own sons on a rebellion he could not finish. He lost that war. He lost 2 sons in it. He has been sitting on those islands ever since, waiting for another chance, and this is his chance. He is not offering you a fleet. He is offering you a rope to tie your house to his, and when he pulls it, he will pull it at a moment of his choosing." "The fleet is real," Theon says. "So is the trap." She does not look at Theon when she says it. She looks at Robb. Balon Greyjoy launched a war against this realm 10 years ago. He is not a man who forgets what he wants. He has found a better moment, that is all. And Jon Snow is the price he is asking you to pay. Jon, who you cannot pull off the wall without telling every sworn man in the Night's Watch that the oath is a convenience and nothing more. Theon waits for her to finish. Then he speaks. "I grew up at Winterfell. he says. "I know what Jon Snow gave up when he took the Black, and I know what Balon Greyjoy's fleet can do because I have been on those ships. Without sea power, my lord, you win every fight on land, and you still lose this war. Tywin Lannister is at Harrenhal right now, and he is not afraid of you. He retreats when you press him, and he waits and he rebuilds, and then he comes back when you are tired and your men are hungry. You cannot ride him down. He is too patient, and he has too much gold. But if his supply ships start burning off the western coast and his sea lanes close, then he is not retreating safely to Casterly Rock anymore. He is caught between your army to the east and the water to the west." The room is quiet. The war room has maps from 3 different campaigns pinned to the stone walls. The Riverlands alone have been fought over twice already, and the ground outside is thick with men who died for soil that still does not belong to anyone. Every victory Robb has won here is real, and every one of them has cost him something he will not get back. The Lannisters can absorb those costs in a way the North cannot. Robb looks at the map for a long time. He traces a line with his finger from the Iron Islands south to the Westerlands coast, and then east along the Riverlands to where his army currently sits, and he does it slowly, the way a man does when he is making himself understand a shape rather than just see it. Without ships, Tywin can always pull back. He has Casterly Rock behind him and gold in the earth beneath it. The Northern Army is living on the Riverlands, and the Riverlands are running out of what armies need. But a fleet between Tywin and the sea changes the geometry of the entire war. Jon is at the wall right now, beyond it, or close to it. Out on the Great Ranging with Mormont and 300 men into country that has been growing stranger and colder for years. Jon chose to go there. He put his name on an oath and gave up everything he might have been because a bastard with no name had no other place to go, and that was the only honest thing he had left. Robb thinks about that. He does not decide in the room. He tells Theon and his mother he needs time, and he dismisses them both. And then he sits alone in the war room with the map and the fire, and the question he does not know how to resolve without someone getting hurt. An hour later, he calls for parchment. He writes one letter. He writes it carefully, which is not how he usually writes. It is short. The letter goes north by Raven to Castle Black. He does not write beyond the wall, because there is no way to reach Jon out on the ranging, not by bird and not by rider, and if Jon has already gone deep into the north, then the question may have to wait for weeks anyway. But if Jon is back at Castle Black, Mormont's master will put it in his hands. The letter does not give Robb's answer. It asks Jon one question. Do you want this? It is not a command. Robb folds the parchment, seals it with his mark, and hands it to the Maester. Then he sits back down at the table and looks at the map and waits to learn what his brother is going to say. The gate at the bottom of the wall is a tunnel of black ice. It goes through 200 feet of the stuff from the south side to the north and back again, and every man who rides through it knows he is crossing something real, not just something built of frozen water. Jon Snow has ridden through it enough times that he has stopped counting, and he still feels it every time. He comes back from patrol in the early afternoon, his horse tired and his breath misting in the cold air south of the wall's shadow. The Great Ranging has not departed yet. The full force is still gathering, still finding enough horses and enough dried meat and enough ravens to keep 300 men alive north of the wall for months. Jon has been ranging the near country in the meantime, riding the ridges close to the wall where the trees grow wrong and the silence has a different texture than silence should. He has seen tracks he cannot name. He has not reported them because he does not know what to make of them yet. He comes back from these patrols in a mood that does not lift quickly. He hands his horse off at the stables and is pulling his gloves off when one of the stewards finds him and says, "The Lord Commander wants to see him." Mormont's solar is on the upper floor of the King's Tower, and it is warm, which is not something Jon takes for granted at Castle Black. The old bear is sitting at his table when Jon comes in. A raven's message lies on the table in front of him, already unrolled and read and set down with the particular care of a man who has thought carefully about what he found inside it. Ghost is not in the room, which is unusual. Mormont's expression does not give much away, but Jon has been the man's steward long enough to read the difference between his versions of quiet. This is not the ordinary kind. "Sit," Mormont says. Jon sits. Mormont pushes the letter across the table without a word. Jon picks it up and reads it. It is from Robb. The words are Robb's, plain and direct, in the way Robb is always plain and direct when something matters to him. He lays out what Balon Greyjoy has proposed, Asha Greyjoy's hand. The Greyjoy fleet. Jon legitimized as Jon Stark, released from the Watch, backed by ironborn swords. Robb does not tell Jon what to do. He asks one question and leaves the rest of the page blank. Jon sets it down. He cannot do this, Jon says. He is asking if you want him to, Mormont says. I swore an oath. Jon says it the way a man says something he knows is not a complete answer to the question being put to him, but says it anyway because it is where he must begin. I shall take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. I shall wear no crowns and win no glory. He said those words once in the dark, in the yard at Castle Black, before a fire, and he meant every one of them. He still means them. I am a brother of the Night's Watch. Mormont is quiet for a moment. He has the look of a man who has been doing the hardest kind of arithmetic since before Jon walked through the door. The Watch is 200 men under strength, Mormont says. We have been under strength for 3 years. We are about to march 300 of the men we have north into country that has been wrong for a generation, to learn what is making it wrong, and the realm we exist to protect is tearing itself apart from the south. He pauses. If Robb Stark wins his war quickly, men come back to the wall. Recruits arrive. Houses send their younger sons. If it drags out another 2 years, the lords who might have sent us those men will have spent them in their own battles, on their own ground, for their own reasons. The wall does not get shorter when the realm bleeds dry. Jon looks at the letter. You are not telling me to go, he says. No, Mormont says. I am not. That is not mine to tell you. But you are not telling me to stay. Mormont says nothing, which is itself an answer. Jon sets the letter on the table and looks out the window. The top of the wall is visible from here, a long, pale line against the gray sky. He chose this. He chose it over everything else that was not actually on offer. Ned Stark's bastard had no lands to inherit, no name worth anything in a lord's hall, no claim, no future south of the wall or on it. He came here because this was the only place that had ever felt like it might be enough. Where a bastard name did not follow him like a shadow. He is 16. He gave those things up at 16. The oath is what he has in place of them. He has kept it cleanly. He has not bent it in the ways that some men bend oaths, finding reasons why this circumstance or that one makes the wording flexible. He has served as Mormont's steward. He has trained. He has ranged. He was going to go north with the rest of them into the dark and into whatever is waiting for them in it, and he had made his peace with that. He had almost convinced himself it was enough. And yet, if Robb legitimizes him, Jon Snow ceases to exist as a legal person. Jon Stark comes into being in his place. The Night's Watch holds the oath of a man named Jon Snow. What does it hold when that man no longer exists in law? He does not know the answer to that. He is not certain anyone does. He suspects that may be exactly the point. He sits there long enough that the fire burns down a little. Mormont feeds another log into it from the stack by the hearth without being asked, and neither of them speaks, and the wind off the top of the wall pushes at the windows as if testing the seams. He does not tell Mormont what he is thinking. He suspects Mormont already knows. The old bear did not reach Lord Commander by failing to read the men under his command, and he has been reading Jon since the first night the boy arrived at Castle Black, angry and certain of himself, and better trained than anyone at the wall had expected from a lord's bastard. Jon stands. He takes the letter with him. He thanks the Lord Commander and leaves the solar and walks down through the tower and across the yard to the rookery, where he borrows a piece of parchment from the maester and sits at the cold writing table alone. He thinks about what Theon said to him once, years ago at Winterfell, about the Iron Islands, about what it meant to come from the sea. He thinks about a girl he has never met who is said to captain her own ship and command her own crew, and who was, by every account Theon ever gave, not the kind of person who accepted things because she was told to. He holds the quill over the parchment for a long time. Then he writes 4 words. Tell me about her. He folds the parchment, seals it, and gives it to the maester without explanation. Then he goes out into the yard. Ghost comes to him from across the courtyard without being called, pale as fresh snow and silent in the way he always is, and presses his head against Jon's side the way he does when something has shifted that neither of them has words for. Jon puts his hand on Ghost's neck and holds it there. He stands in the cold while the raven climbs into the gray sky south and watches it until it is too small to see. The courier arrives at Castle Black in the early morning, before most of the garrison is awake. He comes with a royal escort, which draws looks from the men in the yard as the party rides through the gate, and he carries a sealed document that Jorah Mormont takes in his own hands and reads standing in the cold outside the door rather than bringing the man inside first. Within an hour, Mormont has called his officers. They gather in the hall by the fire. The senior rangers, the stewards who have been at the wall long enough to understand what they are looking at, the men who run the daily business of Castle Black without ceremony. Mormont reads them the document plainly. Robb Stark, king in the north and of the Trident, hereby legitimizes Jon Snow, bastard of Eddard Stark, as Jon Stark, true-born son and rightful heir of the late Lord of Winterfell. The document bears Robb's seal. The hall is quiet. Mormont lets the quiet stand and then speaks. The Night's Watch holds the oath of a man named Jon Snow. He says, "By royal decree, that man no longer legally exists. The person who will stand before us this morning is Jon Stark. He is a different man." He pauses. He never swore the oath. One of the rangers opens his mouth and then closes it. Another stares at the fire. A steward near the back of the hall makes a sound that does not resolve into agreement or objection and stays there. The argument is legally thin. Every man in the room understands that. The oath was not sworn to a name but to the Watch itself, and the Watch does not simply release men because another king sends a letter. But Mormont is not asking for their approval of the principle. He is the Lord Commander. He is telling them what will be accepted because the Watch needs what the acceptance of this provides, and because the alternative is holding a man against the will of the king in the north, while the north itself is at war, which is a fight the Watch cannot win and should not pick. They accept it the way men accept things that are already decided, without enthusiasm, but without challenge. Jon is not in the hall. He is in the yard with Ghost, waiting. When Mormont comes out to the yard, he does not spend time on ceremony. He tells Jon what the hall decided. Jon listens without interrupting. Then he goes inside and puts his few traveling things together, and when he comes back out he is carrying Longclaw held out in both hands toward the Lord Commander. The Valyrian steel blade with its direwolf pommel catches the pale morning light. Mormont had ordered the pommel changed when he gifted the sword, the bear replaced with a direwolf, and the gesture was deliberate then, and it is deliberate now in the offer Jon is making. Mormont does not take it. "That sword was given to you," he says. "It is a Valyrian steel sword," Jon says. "The Watch could use it. The Watch has 400 men and one Valyrian steel sword," Mormont says. "You are going to the Iron Islands." He looks at Jon without moving. "A man going to the Iron Islands needs it more than a man staying at the wall." Jon has no answer for that. He straps Longclaw back on and does not argue. He says farewell to Pip and Gren. Sam grips his hand and holds it too long and starts 3 different sentences and does not finish any of them, his eyes bright and red at the edges, and Jon stands still and lets him finish or not finish as he needs to. He walks the length of Castle Black's yard one last time with Ghost padding beside him, past the armory and the training ground and the rookery where the ravens live and the sept that no one at Castle Black actually uses. He chose this place when it was the only place on offer, and he chose it with his eyes open. That does not become less true because the choice has changed. He releases Ghost at the gate. The direwolf sits and watches him go, pale as new snow, perfectly still in the cold. The King's Road runs south from Castle Black through the north, and it is the only true road in any direction from here, the only proper track laid through all of that open land. Jon rides with 2 men Mormont assigned without explanation, and the 3 of them travel without much talk through forest and then open country, through the long, pale landscape that the Starks held and that Robb's war left thin of men and cattle both. Small folk outside their villages watch the small party go by and say nothing. The royal decree has not reached them yet. They are still watching the horizon for the kind of soldiers that take things. Jon watches the road ahead instead of the road behind him. He is riding towards something he knows almost nothing about. That is, at least, different from riding towards something he knows too well. White Harbor is the only proper city north of the Neck, and it announces itself before you reach it. The smell of fish and salt water and the sounds of a working harbor, the walls visible from a distance on the flat coastal ground. Jon rides through the gates in the late afternoon and finds a message waiting for him at the harbormaster's building. A raven from Robb had arrived days before him, which means Robb guessed his route before Jon chose it, which is what a man does when he has been running a war and learned to think ahead of his own people. The letter is 2 pages. Robb's page is clear and brief. A ship is waiting at the eastern dock, a reliable vessel, well provisioned. The political terms between Robb and Balon are proceeding. Balon's people at Pike have been told Jon is coming. Theon's note was emphatic on one point: do not arrive as a lord. The second page is in Theon's hand, shorter than Robb's and more direct. She captains her own ship. She has been doing this since before most men her age could have been trusted with a fishing boat, and she kept doing it regardless. Do not arrive with ceremony. Do not arrive dressed for a haul. Do not assume you know what you are walking into, because you do not. And do not tell her I wrote any of this, or she will throw us both off the dock, and she will be right to. Jon reads it twice, folds it carefully, and puts it in his coat. He looks at his traveling clothes. He keeps them. The ship Robb arranged is a solid trading vessel out of White Harbor. Not large, not meant for ceremony, but well built and seaworthy. It catches the morning tide, and Jon stands at the bow watching White Harbor fall away behind him, then the coast of the north, and then just gray water in every direction. He has never sailed anywhere farther than a frozen river. The open sea moves differently than he expected. He finds his footing without asking how. Longclaw is on his back. He has no plan beyond arriving. The coast is gone behind him. He is heading west. The sea around Pike is the color of iron in the late light, and the castle rises from it the way something old rises, not built so much as established, as if the rock underneath decided to keep going upward and the Greyjoys simply moved in when it stopped. Jon watches it come into view from the bow of the trading vessel as they round the headland, the towers on their separate stone pillars, arched bridges of cut stone spanning the gaps where the drops are longest, and swaying hempen spans bridging the rest, rope and plank above the churn far below. The oldest tower stands on a crooked pillar at the castle's edge. Its base is white with years of salt spray. Its upper stones are dark green where the lichen has taken hold. Jon watches it and does not let his face do anything in particular. They dock at the lower harbor. It is not a grand arrival. The trading vessel has no banner, and Jon has not asked for one, and when the gangplank goes down, there is no escort in the formal sense, no line of armored men, no ceremony. There is instead a woman standing at the edge of the dock with her arms crossed and her weight on her back foot, watching the ship come in with an expression that is not welcoming and not hostile and gives nothing away at all. Asha Greyjoy is lean and dark-eyed, her black hair cut close to her head, and she is dressed the way a ship captain dresses when she has come directly from the deck rather than from a hall. Practical clothes, nothing for display. She stands like someone who has spent enough years on rolling decks that flat ground feels like a small concession. She does not come forward when Jon walks down the gangplank. She makes him come to her. Jon walks across the dock and stops a few feet from her. She looks him over without being subtle about it. He is 16, not large, dark-haired, wearing traveling clothes that have been on him for the better part of a week. He is not dressed like a lord's son. He is not dressed like much of anything. He meets her eyes without flinching and does not try to fill the silence. "You are smaller than I expected," she says. "You are exactly what I expected," he says. That is not what she thought he would say. She looks at him for a moment longer, then uncrosses her arms. "What do you want?" she says. Not a greeting, a real question. "I want to know why your father thinks a bastard off the wall is worth a crown," he says. She laughs. It is a short, unsentimental sound, but it is genuine. He thinks you can be made into something useful. He is not in the business of receiving gifts. He is in the business of building things. She looks at him steadily. "I have not decided yet whether he is right about you." "That seems fair," Jon says. She studies him a moment more. Then she turns and walks toward the castle without inviting him to follow, which is itself a kind of invitation. Balon Greyjoy receives Jon in the great hall at Pike, seated at the far end of the long table. The hall is stone and salt smell and the constant sound of the sea pressing through the walls, and it is colder than Jon expected, even for a castle built on a sea stack in the middle of open water. Balon is older, gray-haired, with the look of a man who has spent a long time waiting for something he considers himself owed. He looks at Jon the way a craftsman looks at raw material and has not yet decided whether it is worth working. Balon lays out the terms without ceremony. The fleet will fight for the joint alliance. Jon Stark, legitimized by his brother's decree, will be backed by Greyjoy recognition and Greyjoy ships. Asha will be his rock wife, not his salt wife. The distinction matters here, and Balon makes certain Jon understands it before he continues. This is not a trade. This is a forging. The iron price paid differently. Jon listens to all of it. When Balon finishes, Jon asks one question. Does Asha agree? Something shifts in Balon's expression. Not much, and it is quickly controlled. He says, "That is her business." John takes that as a no. He thanks Balon for the hospitality and does not press the point. He is shown to a room in one of the towers that looks out over the sea. He eats, and he puts Longclaw against the wall beside the bed, and when the light outside has gone properly dark and the torches are lit along the dock below, he goes back down to the harbor. The Black Wind is moored at the far end of the dock. It is a longship, lower and faster looking than the vessel John came in on, with a black hull and the look of a ship that has been worked hard and maintained carefully. There are crew on the deck going about the evening tasks of a ship at anchor. John walks to the gangplank and steps onto it and keeps walking. No one stops him. He is halfway to the deck when Asha's voice comes from somewhere forward. "Off," she says. He keeps walking. She is at the prow, looking back at him with an expression that is not quite amused. The crew around her has gone very still in the way crew goes still when they are watching something and pretending not to. "You board a captain's ship without asking," she says. "I had a question," John says. "You did not look like you were going to come to me." "What question? What do you want out of this arrangement?" She looks at him. Then she jerks her chin at a coil of rope near the mast, and he sits on it, and she leans against the rail, and the crew very carefully goes back to their work. "I want to know if you can fight," she says. "I can fight," John says. "Everyone says they can fight," she says. "My father's men can fight. My sailors can fight. The question is whether you fight well enough that I don't spend the next several years explaining to my captains why I sailed a fleet for a man who can't hold a blade in a real yard against a real opponent." "Give me a chance to show you," John says. She looks at him. He does not elaborate. She respects the absence of elaboration more than she would have respected the presence of it. "Be in the yard tomorrow morning," she says. "Early. I will have one of my men there." She pauses. "He will not be gentle." "Good," John says. She says nothing to that. She watches him stand up from the rope coil and walk back toward the gangplank without ceremony, and she does not call after him, and the crew of the Black Wind very carefully looks at everything except the dock until he is gone. John walks back through the lower harbor to his tower room. The sea below is dark and constant in its noise. He sits for a while on the stone ledge by the window and looks out at the black water and thinks about tomorrow morning and not about what comes after. There is no point thinking further than one thing at a time when the first thing has not happened yet. Theon has been watching from across the harbor, standing in the shadow of a supply shed since John walked onto the gangplank of the Black Wind without permission and without hesitation. He has been trying to name what he is feeling. He knew Jon Snow at Winterfell for years. He is not certain he knew this. He turns and walks inside and does not tell anyone what he saw. The yard at Pike is a stone square above the harbor, one wall open to the sea wind. Jon is there before the light has fully come in, with Longclaw belted on his back, and the man Asha sends is already waiting. He is not large either, which is the first thing Jon notices. He is somewhere in Asha's range of years, dark and quick-looking, with an axe in each hand, and the comfortable posture of someone who has done this many times and found it easy. He looks at Jon without saying anything, and Jon looks back, and they both understand what the morning is. The first exchange is fast and goes badly for Jon. The sailor moves like the deck of a ship in a squall, constantly adjusting, never where you expect him to be, and Jon goes down in the first minute on the cold stone. He gets up. The second exchange goes better. Jon reads the sailor's rhythm and stops trying to match it. He fights his own way instead, not reckless, not trying to win quickly. He keeps moving and keeps getting up when he has to, and he has to several more times before the session is done. And when it is done, the sailor looks at him with something that is not quite respect, but is paying attention in the same direction. Asha is sitting on a barrel at the yard's edge with her arms on her knees. She has been watching the whole time and saying nothing. Jon walks over and does not wait for her to speak first. "Well," he says. "You lost," she says. "I know. Am I worth explaining to your captains?" She looks at him for a moment. "Ask me again after 3 more mornings," she says. He nods, and that is the end of it for the morning. It is not the end of it that afternoon. She finds him near the sea gate where he has been looking out at the water, and she leans on the wall beside him without ceremony and starts talking about the campaign she did not get to run. 30 longships, she says. She had 30 longships ready, and a plan for Deepwood Motte, in the north where Robb's men were spread thin and the pickings were real. She had walked through the logistics of it so many times she could have run the campaign in her sleep. Then Balon changed the plan and put her in the arrangement instead, and the 30 longships are sitting in the harbor going nowhere. She does not say she resents it as a flat statement. She says it the way a person says things when they have already processed the resentment and set it aside for practical reasons, as fact without asking for sympathy, but without pretending the fact is not what it is. Jon listens. He does not tell her he understands, because he does not understand the Iron Islands or what a campaign like that would have meant to a woman who has been fighting for the right to lead one. He listens to the specific shape of what she is describing. When she stops talking, he says, "Tell me what Deepwood Motte would have required." And she looks at him with an expression he has not seen from her before. And then she tells him. It takes a long time. He asks questions. She answers them. Afterward, she does not say anything about it directly. But she is the one who suggests they walk the wall above the harbor, and she is the one who points out the approaches a fleet would use and the places a ship captain with any sense would avoid. And when she does it, she is talking to him as a person whose understanding she is building, not performing for. He notices. He does not make anything of it. The ravens between Pike and River Run fly in both directions through the days that follow. Robb and Balon negotiate through intermediaries, with Theon sitting in the middle of it, reading both sides and drafting the words that have to satisfy both lords without making either feel he has given more than he got. The core terms are straightforward. The Greyjoy fleet will move against Lannister coastal supply lines within the month. Balon's kingship of the Iron Islands will be acknowledged by Robb as king in the north. The marriage between Jon and Asha will take place at Pike before the fleet sails. In exchange, Robb's legitimization decree stands and Jon Stark is backed by the combined weight of both houses. The complicated part is the form of Balon's recognition. Balon will not bow to Robb. He has been clear about this across every communication. Robb will not crown Balon. That would mean one king receiving his crown from another king's hand, which is a different thing entirely from two kings acknowledging each other as equals. And the difference matters to everyone in this arrangement for different reasons. Theon's solution is a document that avoids the language of crowning or submission entirely. It says only, Robb of House Stark, king in the north and of the Trident, acknowledges Balon of House Greyjoy as king of the Iron Islands, and Balon of House Greyjoy acknowledges Robb of House Stark in kind. 2 men, 2 crowns. No ceremony of receipt. Balon reads the draft 3 times. He says nothing for a long moment. Then he accepts it. He has paid for this with more than ink. He has paid with 10 years sitting on the Iron Islands after the Greyjoy rebellion failed, after the war he launched in 289 AC cost him his sons Rodrik and Maron, and left him a king no one in the rest of the world acknowledged. He calls what he is doing now a forging because that is what the iron price is. In the end, you take what you can make, not what you are given. He signs the document. Asha comes to Jon that evening, alone, not in the hall. She finds him on the walkway above the sea gate where the wind comes in from the open water, and she tells him plainly. I agree to the match, she says. I want to be clear about what that means. I am agreeing because I have decided to, not because my father decided for me. That is a different thing, and you need to know which one is true. Jon looks at her. If you forget the difference, she says, or if you start to think it does not matter after a while, I will remind you, with the pointy end of something. I know the difference, he says. She looks at him steadily. I believe you think you do, she says. It is not an insult. It is the kind of statement that means, prove it, keep proving it, and that is the whole arrangement between them. He nods. She nods back. The next morning, they shake hands in front of the crew of the Black Wind, on the deck with the sea behind them and the harbor below. Not the ceremony of a lord claiming a lady. 2 people who have agreed on something. The crew watches without making much of it, which is the Ironborn way of treating something as real. No performance, just acknowledgement. Balon watches from the sea gate. He is still, arms at his sides, and his expression is the expression of a man who has finally brought a long-held plan to its first solid ground. Theon stands beside him. He is the son who carried the message and drafted the language and stood in the space between 2 houses that neither one entirely claims him. He was the hostage once, the ward at Winterfell who did not fully belong to either side. Now he is the man who built the bridge. He is still standing on it. He does not yet know which shore he will walk toward when the bridge is no longer needed. He watches Jon and Asha on the deck below and says nothing and stands next to his father in the wind off the sea. The priest of the drowned god is an old man, gray-bearded and water-weathered, and he does not explain the rite before he performs it. He takes Jon by the shoulders at the edge of Pike's Rocks, where the sea comes in cold and gray between the stone pillars, and he pushes him under. The water is cold in a way that removes thought, that takes the breath and turns the body's whole attention to survival. Jon does not fight it. He has been told what to expect more or less, but being told and being held under the surface of the Iron Island Sea in the gray morning are genuinely different things, and what he expects and what the cold actually does to a body are also different things. He holds still and waits. He stays under for longer than any reasonable rite should require, long enough that the cold moves from surface to bone, and then hands take him by the shoulders and pull him up, and he comes out of the water gasping, blinking salt, catching his breath in front of 20 Ironborn captains on the dock above the rocks. They look at him without expression. Then one calls it out and the rest follow, their voices overlapping across the water and the stone. What is dead may never die. Jon does not know the response. He is standing on the rocks with the sea running off him, breathing hard, and the words that are supposed to come back do not come. He looks for them and does not find them. Asha is standing to his left. She has not gone into the water, as that is not the form for the one already born to it. She reads Jon's face and says the words for him, her voice level and unhurried, but harder and stronger. The captains accept it. The moment moves on. That evening, before the feast, Jon climbs to the seawall on the southern side of Pike's outer ring, the part that faces inland and north, and he stands there, alone. The old gods have no priests and no texts and no temples. They are worshipped through weirwoods and silence and the willingness to be heard, and there is no weirwood here. There is no godswood anywhere on the Iron Islands. The faith that built this place runs on salt and drowning and a different god entirely. Jon knows this. He faces north anyway. He speaks quietly toward the wall and Winterfell, toward the trees and the cold and whatever is listening through them, the way a man speaks when he is not certain he will be heard, but is certain the attempt matters. He does not hear Asha come up behind him. She is quiet when she wants to be. She stands there for a while without speaking, and when he turns around she is looking at the same direction he was, as if she is trying to see what he was talking to. She does not ask. She does not understand it, but she stands in the silence of it, and that is its own kind of respect. They go to the feast. The great hall at Pike is full from end to end. There is salt fish and smoked meat and dark bread and enough ale moving through the room that the stone walls are beginning to sweat with the warmth of too many bodies in a hall built to stay cold. The benches are full and the noise is constant and loud and has no pauses in it for reflection, which is, Jon understands, exactly the point. This is not a Winterfell feast. There is no space here for the kind of quiet ceremony that a Stark table maintains. It is Ironborn, and it sounds like it. Balon stands once at the beginning, and the hall goes quiet enough to hear him. He does not offer a toast. He makes a declaration. The Greyjoys have forged a king, he says. The Iron Fleet sails at dawn. The war that cost us what it cost us will be paid back with interest. He does not name the cost. Everyone in the hall old enough to remember 289 AC already knows it. The rebellion that ended with Rodrik and Balon Greyjoy dead, with the fleet broken, with Balon sitting on Pike for 10 years, acknowledged by no one. He sits back down, and the hall is briefly quiet in a way that is not reverent but is present, and then the noise comes back, and the ale keeps moving. Theon sits at a middle table. He is not at the captain's end and not at the high table, and there is no other honest place for him. He watches Jon across the hall and tries to reconcile the boy he knew at Winterfell with the person sitting at that table now. He mostly fails. He decides that is probably how it is supposed to be. Asha finds him late in the evening, after the hall has started to empty. "You made this happen," she says. She says it without warmth, without ceremony, the way she says everything she means but does not want to overstate. Theon looks at her. "Is that good or bad?" "It happened," she says. "That is what it is." She walks away, and Theon sits with his ale and is not certain whether he has been praised or simply acknowledged. and decides the difference may not matter as much as he once thought it would. Jon finds Asha after the hall has emptied, when the sea sound has come back into the silence of the castle. They end up at a narrow window that looks out over the harbor, and it is easier to talk there than anywhere else they have managed. Asha tells him what the Black Wind can do in a fight at sea. She is not boasting. She is giving him information he will need if they are to coordinate anything useful across ravens and distance once the fleet is gone. She tells him about her crew and the 30 longships and the conditions under which a longship fleet is devastating and the conditions under which it is not. Jon listens and asks the specific questions of a man trying to understand a way of fighting he has never seen. Then he tells her about the wall. He tells her the shape of it without the full weight of the Ranging or Mormont's private fears. That the land beyond the wall has been getting darker and colder and wrong in a way that has no explanation except the one that sounds impossible until you have spent time on the other side. He tells her the Watch was sending 300 men north to find out what was making it wrong, and that he is no longer with them, and that he does not know how it goes. Asha is quiet for a moment when he finishes. "You are saying there is something worse than the Lannisters," she says. "Much worse," he says. "And the fleet I am sailing south is supposed to help with that. How? If the realm tears itself apart fighting this war," he says, "there is nothing left to hold the wall with when the time comes." She looks at him. She thinks about it in the particular way she thinks about things that change the shape of what she believed she was doing. She is someone who plans past the first objective to what comes after it, and what Jon is describing is not a political problem or a tactical one. It is older and colder than any war she has run, and she did not come from a tradition that has the luxury of dismissing old, cold things. The drowned god is old. The sea that carries his name is older. "All right," she says. It is not full agreement. It is the sound of someone adding a variable to an equation she has been running, deciding it belongs there. She does not say anything more about it. Neither does he. Before dawn, Asha is on the Black Wind, and the harbor at Pike is loud with 30 longships making ready. Jon stands on the dock and watches it. He has seen armies break camp in the dark and move out at first light, the slow, grinding business of getting men and horses moving. This is faster and quieter and more purposeful, the longships lean and low in the water, their crews working without wasted motion. The Black Wind leads out first as the morning light comes in off the eastern water, and the 30 ships follow it, and Jon watches until the last of them has cleared the headland and there is only open sea where the fleet was. He turns from the harbor. He goes to find his horse. He rides south toward the riverlands with the sound of the sea at his back, and it takes a long time before the land swallows it completely. The Lannister coast does not see them coming. This is the point. Asha Greyjoy has 30 longships and a campaign designed by a woman who spent years thinking about how to hit a coastline that believed itself untouchable, and the western shores of the Westerlands are long and largely undefended because the Lannisters have never needed to defend them. Casterly Rock sits above the coast and has not been taken in living memory, and the lords of the sea-facing villages have always assumed that counted for something. It does not count for much the morning the Iron Fleet rounds the headland before dawn. The first raids hit supply ships in harbor, not towns. Asha is precise about this. The men on the dock scramble, and the Ironborn crew boards the vessels quickly, strips what can be carried, burns what cannot. 3 supply ships go down in the first morning. By midday, word is running inland by courier. The fleet is already gone. They hit the coast 3 more times in the week that follows, at different places and different hours so that the pattern cannot be read. The Lannister dock guards at the coastal villages start watching the water before dawn. Asha moves south and hits a harbor they were not watching. Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, Robb's supply scouts bring back a different kind of report. The Lannister wagons coming east from the Westerlands are arriving less full, and the gaps in the schedule are widening. Robb is 17 now, and he has been running this war long enough to know what a gap in a supply schedule means. He sends a raven to Asha with one question: "How long can you keep doing this?" Her answer arrives in 2 days, "Until we run out of ships or coast to hit, and we have more ships than they have coast." Robb shows the letter to Jon. Jon has been in Robb's camp for 2 weeks by then, having cut south and west from the King's Road when the Riverlands began. He came into camp in the early morning still in his traveling clothes, and Robb was in the field and came back to find his brother sitting outside the command tent. And the first thing Robb said was, "You could have written ahead." They fought together for the first time in the days that followed, in a skirmish along a ford where a Lannister cavalry unit had been raiding the local smallfolk. The skirmish was short, and Jon had Longclaw out for less than 2 minutes before the Outriders decided the ford was not worth the cost. But Robb watched all of it. He watched Jon move and hold his ground and make the right reads without being directed, and what he saw was not the bastard who grew up beside him at Winterfell learning to use a training sword. What he saw was someone who had been doing this for real, while Robb was still becoming a king. He did not say any of that. He said, "You are not bad with that sword." Jon said, "You should see the other fellow." Robb looked at the ford, and then at Jon, and something shifted in his face that was not quite amusement, and was something better. The ravens between the camp and the Iron Fleet maintain the coordination that keeps the campaign honest. In the Riverlands, Tywin Lannister is at Harrenhal, holding his position with the particular patience of a man who has lost battles and knows what outlasting an opponent looks like. He does not panic when the coastal reports arrive. He adjusts his supply lines, routes his wagons differently, writes letters. He is not moving. He is, however, eating through his reserves faster than he was a month ago. The northern host wins a field engagement in the 3rd week, at a crossing point the Lannister forces had been using to move between positions in the central Riverlands. It is not a large action, and it will not have a name that anyone remembers. The ground is wet, and the timing is good, and a Lannister unit gets caught between Robb's Outriders and a natural barrier and cannot hold. Robb takes the position and puts banners on it and moves on. The Lannisters do not attempt to take it back. The war is not won, but the math of it is beginning to change. Meanwhile, far from the Riverlands and the burning Lannister docks, in a port somewhere beyond the narrow sea, a man who has been living at a remove from his family's business hears news of his niece's wedding. Euron Greyjoy has been in exile since his brother Balon sent him away, and exile has not made him quiet or small or patient in the way that exile sometimes does. It has made him other things. He reads what he can piece together about the arrangement. His niece married to a Stark bastard who now has a Stark name, the Greyjoy fleet committed to someone else's war, and Balon calling all of it the Iron Price when it is, from where Euron is standing, nothing of the kind. A daughter traded for treaty ink. A fleet loaned out to a Greenlander king. He begins to move. He does not hurry. He moves the way a man moves who has a long game in mind and knows that arriving too early is the same mistake as arriving too late. The right moment is not yet, but it is coming. In the same week that Euron's ship turns west, Asha runs her most ambitious action. The target is a Lannister transport convoy of 6 vessels running south along the Westerlands coast in darkness, carrying grain and salted provisions toward Harrenhal. The convoy has 2 armed galleys as escort, heavier than a longship and better armed and slower. Asha splits her force. She sends 8 longships wide around the convoy's seaward side while she brings the Black Wind and 4 others up from the south, where the escort galleys are not looking. The galleys see the northern group and turn to meet it, and Asha's 5 ships come into the convoy from the other direction before the galleys can return. They take 3 of the transport ships. The other 3 run for the coast and reach it, which Asha intended. She does not want to spend the night pulling men out of open water. The crew from the 3 captured ships is put into the convoy's own longboats with water and oars and pointed toward shore. The coast is not far. They will make it. One of her captains, working the lines of the 2nd captured ship, watches the longboats row away and asks her why. "Because we are winning this war," she says, "and we are going to need to stop eventually. What we do between now and then is what we will be remembered for." The captain does not argue. The captains of the 30 longships have been watching how Asha Greyjoy runs this campaign since the fleet left Pike, and what they are watching is someone who knows exactly what the Iron Price costs and has decided, without apology and without sentiment, which costs are worth paying and which are not. They bring the 3 captured ships into a cove they have been using as a temporary anchorage. Asha writes a raven to Robb's camp. 3 more. Then she goes back to the Black Wind and charts the next section of coast. Euron Greyjoy does not announce himself at the harbor mouth. He sails in on a clear morning with 3 ships at his back, vessels that carry no Greyjoy colors, and the harbor watch at Pike has enough time to see what is happening before they have time to do anything about it. By the time a runner reaches Balon's Hall with the news, the ships are already moored and Euron is already on the dock. He is not what the dock workers expect a returned exile to look like, which is the first thing Theon notices from the upper window where he has been watching since the sails came around the headland. He is not hollow-eyed or road-worn or reduced by years of living outside Balon's reach. He is well-dressed and unhurried and moving through the harbor the way a man moves through a place he considers already his by nature rather than by any official arrangement, stopping to look at the ships, speaking to dockmen he seems to recognize, taking in the shape of what has changed. He has the ease of a man who has been on a very long journey and has decided the journey was worth it and is ready to collect what he went for. Theon has heard stories about Balon Greyjoy for years. He understands, watching him now, that the stories did not account for how ordinary the man looks when he is simply standing somewhere and being looked at. This is more unsettling than the stories were. Balon receives the news in his hall with the particular stillness that means the opposite of stillness. The exile stands. Euron was ordered away, and he went. And the fact that he has now chosen to come back does not dissolve the order. Balon sends word down to the harbor. Euron is to take his ships and go. Euron does not go. He is still on the dock when Balon's men deliver the message, and he listens to them. And then he turns toward the open harbor where a gathering of dock workers and captains and men with nothing urgent to manage have collected without quite admitting that they came to watch. He does not raise his voice. He speaks in the direction of the harbor at large. He says the Lord of the Iron Islands traded his daughter to a Greenlander boy fresh off the wall for a paper promise and another king's seal. He says it plainly, in the tone of a man presenting a fact that everyone already knows and is simply declining to discuss. He says, the Iron Islands do not sow and they do not receive. They take. He looks at the men around him. He asks, without raising his voice, is what Balon Greyjoy has built with this alliance the iron price, or is it something they have always called by a different name? The dock is quiet. The men there are not agreeing. Most of them have been to the wedding or know men who have. But they are not leaving either, and the older captains near the back of the crowd have the look of men hearing something that gives voice to a discomfort they have been carrying quietly for months. Listening is not agreement. It is not nothing either. Inside the castle, Theon watches from his window and knows exactly what he is looking at. That morning, Euron invokes the Kingsmoot. He does it in the harbor before enough witnesses that Balon cannot refuse without the refusal itself becoming a statement. The Kingsmoot is the oldest mechanism the Iron Islands possess, the assembly of captains at Naga's Hill on the holy isle of Old Week, where the high kings of the Iron Islands were chosen in the ancient days by the voice of the captains gathered. Any captain may call for one when succession is in question or when the drowned god's will is being debated. Euron is in exile. He is not a captain in good standing. But he has ships and men and the words of the invocation, and the men on the dock have heard them, and what is said in public in front of witnesses in the Iron Islands has a weight that Balon cannot simply order away. Euron does not claim the throne outright. He does not say, I should be king. He says, the captains should judge whether what Balon Greyjoy has done with his daughter and his fleet is consistent with the principles by which Greyjoy rule earns the right to exist. He asks only for an audience. He asks only for the question to be put. An older captain near the back of the crowd, a man who lost 2 fingers on his right hand in the Greyjoy rebellion and has been salt-weathered ever since, says quietly that the question deserves an answer. He does not say it to anyone in particular. He does not need to. That is enough. Meanwhile, a raven from Pike reaches a coastal castle where the Iron Fleet has a shore contact, and the message is copied onto fast paper and taken by boat to the Black Wind at anchor offshore. Asha reads it on the deck at first light, alone, and then reads it again. She gives the order to turn the fleet around without explaining to anyone what the message said, because her face when she read it was explanation enough for anyone who knows her. She writes 2 ravens before the fleet is fully underway. One to Robb's camp in the Riverlands, one to a castle on the western coast with a rider who can find Jon. The message is the same in both. Euron is at Pike. He has called for a Kingsmoot. The fleet is coming back, so should you. Then she stands at the Black Wind's bow and watches the Westerland's coast fall away behind her and thinks about everything she will have to say to 30 longship captains about why the campaign they were winning is pausing and whether enough of them understand what a Kingsmoot means if it goes the wrong way. Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, the raven from Asha reaches Robb's command tent in the late afternoon. Robb reads it and passes it to Jon without speaking. Jon reads it. He straightens up. I have to go back, he says. Robb looks at the map on the table. The Lannister position at Harrenhal is holding, and any loosening of pressure on it gives Tywin room to firm his lines. Losing Jon from the field for any length of time costs something real. Robb runs through all of this in the few seconds it takes to be certain the calculation comes out the same way he already knew it would. Go, he says. Jon picks up his gloves from the table. Robb grips his arm before he turns. Not long. Not a speech. The grip of a man who has run out of things that need to be said aloud and has moved on to saying them another way. Jon rides out before the hour is up. Meanwhile, at Pike, Theon goes to Balon's hall in the evening after the harbor has quieted and the day's damage has been done, and sits across from his father in the firelight. Balon is not panicking. Balon does not panic. But the cold quality of his anger is worse than ordinary fury would be, and Theon has enough experience of this particular silence to let it run its course before he speaks. "If Euron wins the Kingsmoot," Theon says, when Balon's silence has reached the stage where it is ready to hear something, "everything you have built ends. The fleet comes home. The alliance breaks. Jon and Asha have nothing to stand on, and neither do you." Balon looks at him. "The men on the dock today were listening," Theon says. "Not all of them, but enough. The captains who remembered the rebellion have been carrying the cost of that war for 10 years. Euron is giving them something to point at. He does not need to win all of them. He only needs enough." Balon is quiet for a moment. The fire moves. "Then go," Balon says, "and make sure he does not win them." It is the first time Balon Greyjoy has asked Theon to do something other than carry a message or stand in a doorway and represent someone else's position. Theon sits with that for a moment after his father stops looking at him. Carrying messages is the work of an errand boy with a title. What Balon is asking now is different, and whether Theon can do it is a question that has no answer yet because he has not tried. He stands up. He has captains to find and talk to before the fleet arrives, and not much time to do it in, and he knows the harbor better than Euron does. He goes. Naga's Hill rises from the shore of Old Wick like something that decided to be a landmark before anyone arrived to name it. The hill is old in the way that sacred places are old, and the bones of Naga herself, the Grey King's sea dragon if the priests are to be believed, have long since become part of the stone. The captains of the Iron Islands have gathered here before when the question of who rules needed answering, and they gather here again. They come by longship from all 7 islands, from Pike and Great Wick and Old Wick and Harlaw and Orkmont and Blacktide and Salt Cliffs, anchoring offshore and coming to the hill by smaller boat, walking up the slope to the flat ground at the top where a Kingsmoot is held. There are old men among them who were captains when Balon Greyjoy launched his rebellion in 289 AC, and young men who were not born yet when it ended badly. There are men who sailed with Asha on the campaign against the Lannister coast, and men who stayed in the harbor. There are men who have already made up their minds, and men who have not. They stand in the wind on Naga's Hill and wait for the thing to begin. Euron speaks first, by right of having called the moot. He is not theatrical in the way of a man who has practiced a speech. He is theatrical in the way of a man who does not need to practice because what he is saying does his work for him. He speaks in the plain language of the iron price, which is a language everyone on that hill has grown up inside of. He does not call Asha a traitor. He does not call Jon Snow a fraud. What he says is this: the Iron Islands do not sow and they do not receive. They take. Everything the Ironborn have, they have taken, and the price of taking is iron, not ink. He says the crown Balon Greyjoy is calling his own was not taken. It was signed for, and a crown that is signed for is not a crown by Ironborn logic. He says, a king forged by another king's letter is not a king. He is a project. He says it without looking at Jon, who is standing at the edge of the gathered captains looking back at him with grey eyes that give nothing away. He does not need to look at Jon. He is speaking about a principle, not a person, and everyone on the hill understands that the principle and the person are the same argument. The captains listen. Some of them are nodding. Asha steps forward when Euron finishes. She does not wait to be called. She is the captain of the Black Wind and the commander of 30 longships, and she has not asked permission to speak in a long time. She faces the assembled captains and speaks from where she stands, at the top of Naga's Hill in the wind, and she does not begin with the iron price. She begins with numbers. She names the Lannister supply ships they took in the first week. She names the docks they burned in the second. She tells them what the Westerland's coast looked like from the deck of the Black Wind after 2 months of the Iron Fleet working it over. She tells them what gaps in a supply line do to an army in the field. She does not claim they have won. She tells them what winning the right kind of war looks like before anyone knows they have won it. Then she says, the Iron Fleet made the Lannisters hungry. It moved across their coast and took what was there and burned what could not be taken and went back for more. That is the iron price, not ink. ships and work and the will to keep going. She looks at Euron. "Name one war you finished," she says. She is not yelling. She is simply asking. Euron smiles. He does not name a war. Jon steps forward when Asha steps back. He is 17 and not large, and not wearing anything that marks him as anything particular, which is deliberate. He speaks plainly and directly and without apology for what he is. He says he is Ned Stark's blood, raised at Winterfell. He says he stood watch at the wall for a year and went north of it on patrol enough times to know what the cold beyond it is doing. He says 300 men rode north on the Great Ranging before he came south, and he has not had word of them since, and the silence from that direction is the kind of silence that means something. He says, "The war in the south is the war everyone is watching. It is not the war that matters most." He says, "The fleet you are standing here arguing over is going to be needed again, not for Lannister ships, for something older and colder and harder to burn. He cannot tell them when. He can tell them that when the time comes, the question will not be who holds which coast. It will be whether there is anything left to hold." He stops talking. The captains on Naga's Hill are quiet, not the quiet of men who are convinced, the quiet of men who have heard something they did not expect to hear and are still deciding where to put it. The vote does not happen cleanly, which is how a Kingsmoot vote works when the question is close. There is no show of hands and no formal count. There is the weight of who stands where and what they say when they say anything and what they do not say when they choose silence. The captains who sailed with Asha stand near her and make their positions clear. The older captains, the ones who remember the rebellion the way you remember a wound, take longer. Theon has been working the ground below the hill since before the first speech was given. He knows which captains arrived uncertain and which arrived already decided, and the uncertain ones are the only ones worth talking to. He moves between them in the time before the formal positions are taken and asks the questions of a man who understands that most arguments are not won on the merits, but on whether the person being asked feels they have been heard. He does not make promises. He asks what they remember and what the fleet brought back, and what Euron has built lately. The outcome takes most of the afternoon. When it comes the way close things come, without ceremony, without clarity, with just enough weight on one side to tip the balance. The captains who sailed with Asha declare for the current arrangement. The captains who listened hardest to Theon declare it also. The captains who came prepared to support Euron are not enough, and they know it before the accounting is finished. Euron's challenge is rejected. The senior captain who has presided over the proceedings speaks the word, and it is brief, and Naga's Hill accepts it with the particular stillness of a place where a decision has just closed a door. Euron looks at Asha. Then he looks at Jon. His expression does not change into anything that could be read as defeat. He looks at them the way a man looks at something he has decided to approach differently. He is told, "Leave the Iron Islands again, or answer for his return in Balon's Hall." He turns and walks back toward the shore without responding. His men follow. His ships are gone from sight before the sun goes fully down. Everyone present understands that this is not the end of Balon Greyjoy. But it is finished for now, and now is what they have, and Asha is already thinking about how many days it will take to get the fleet back to the Lannister coast. The Iron Fleet returns to the Westerlands coast 17 days after the Kingsmoot ends. Asha has spent those 17 days driving the fleet south and west without stopping for anything that is not necessary. By the time they round the headland into the coast, she has been working for months. The fleet is back at full operational strength, 30 ships in formation, and the Lannister docks ahead of them have had several weeks of quiet they should not have assumed would last. They were not ready. The first action is swift and unambiguous. Asha brings the Black Wind in fast from the north while 6 longships come from the west, and the 2 harbor galleys that were supposed to be on watch are not in position, and by the time anyone on shore understands what is happening, the supply depot is already burning. 3 ships go down in the harbor before they can be moved. A burning ship drifts into the pier, and the pier catches. Asha's fleet is gone before a counterforce can be assembled. Meanwhile, Robb moves. He has been waiting for the signal that the fleet is back at sea, and when it arrives by Raven, he gives the order the same afternoon. The northern host has been pressing the Lannister lines without committing to a full engagement, keeping the pressure consistent while the Kingsmoot played out. Now the pressure becomes a push. The Riverlands have been the most fought-over ground in the realm for as long as anyone can remember, and the signs of it are everywhere. Burned villages rebuilt and burned again, small folk who have learned to move when they hear horses, roads worn to mud at the river crossings because everyone has always needed to cross the same rivers. Robb's host moves through it at speed, using the ground the way a man uses ground he has walked before, and the Lannister units in the field have a problem they cannot solve. They cannot be reinforced from the coast because the coast is burning. They cannot pull back to Casterly Rock because the Iron Fleet is on the water between them and the western shore. And they cannot hold their current positions because Robb's host is pushing into them from the east with more men and better timing than they have managed to counter so far. The Lannister position begins to fracture at the edges first. Meanwhile, at sea, Asha does not stop after the first action. She moves south along the coast and hits the next harbor before the news of the first attack can reach it. She burns more than she takes in this phase because speed is worth more than prizes now, and a harbor that is watching for ships is still vulnerable to ships that come in fast from the right angle before the watch has adjusted. She burns 3 more supply stockpiles in 4 days and turns the fleet before the Lannister coastal defense can coalesce into anything that can push back effectively. She writes 1 raven to Robb's camp between attacks. The sea lanes are closed. In the Riverlands, Robb reads the message and calls his commanders together. The main engagement happens at a river crossing the Lannister forces have been using as their eastern anchor point, a position they have held since early in the campaign and have fortified reasonably well. Under ordinary circumstances, it would be a difficult position to take without paying heavily for it. The circumstances are not ordinary. The Lannister commanders at the crossing have received no resupply for 2 weeks and no word of reinforcement from Harrenhal for 4 days, and the men holding the line are not yet hungry, but they know the direction they are heading. Jon is at the front of the breach when it opens. He has been fighting in Robb's host since he came back from the Kingsmoot, taking his place in the line without ceremony, and the men around him stopped treating him as an unknown quantity after enough skirmishes. He fights with Longclaw, the Valyrian steel blade, and he fights the way he learned at Castle Black and sharpened in the yard at Pike, without wasted movement, without the kind of aggression that spends itself before the work is done. When the Lannister line breaks at the crossing, it breaks because the weight behind it is not there anymore. The commanders on the other side are making good decisions with bad resources, and at some point, good decisions cannot compensate for that. The northern host pushes through the gap and takes the crossing, and by midday, Robb's banners are on the eastern bank and the Lannister units that were south of the position are cut off from the main body. The battle is not long. The cost of it is still real. Meanwhile, at Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister receives 2 pieces of news in the same afternoon. The first is that the coastal supply line is gone, not disrupted, gone. The Iron Fleet has been through the harbor network with more force than the first campaign, and what remains is not usable. The second is that the crossing at the river has fallen and the eastern anchor of his Riverlands position has been taken. He reads both reports. He calls no counsel. He does not show what he is thinking to the men in the room. He gives orders. The army withdraws toward Casterly Rock. It is not a rout. Tywin Lannister does not rout. It is the cold and deliberate movement of a man who understands that the position he is holding is no longer worth what it will cost to hold it. He withdraws in good order, covering his rear, and the retreat is as organized as a retreat can be. Robb's host does not catch him. Robb is not fast enough and is smart enough to know it. The Lannisters are not destroyed. Casterly Rock still stands. King's Landing is still in Lannister hands. The war is not over, but the Riverlands are no longer a battlefield. For the first time since the war began, the ground between the neck and the southern borders is not being contested. Robb puts Tully and Stark banners on the positions the Lannisters held and looks south and begins thinking about what comes next. That night, Jon finds Asha on the deck of the Black Wind, where her ship is anchored in a cove off the Westerlands coast. She is sitting at the stern with a ledger open on her knee, writing in it by lamplight. She does not look up when he climbs aboard. He sits on the rail and watches her write for a while. "How many?" he says. 4 ships, she says. 11 men from the Black Wind, more from the others. She does not look up from the ledger. "I know all their names," she closes it after a while. They sit in the quiet of the cove with the sea doing what it always does, regardless of what the people on it have been through. And neither of them says much, because there is not much to say that the other does not already know. Winning is real. What it costs is also real. Knowing it and sitting with the ledger are different things. Jon watches the water. After a while, Asha closes the lamp down and they stay in the dark for a time. The coast they burned is somewhere to the north. The Riverlands are somewhere to the east. Somewhere further north than either of them can see from this cove, the wall still stands, and beyond it, the silence that came back from the ranging is still waiting for an answer no one has been able to give it yet. That is a problem for another day. Tonight, there is the sea and the dark and the cost of what they won. The news comes to Pike by raven in the early morning, while the harbor is still quiet and the sea mist has not yet burned off the rocks. Balon Greyjoy is dead. He died at Pike, on one of the rope bridges between the towers, in the night. The manner of it is not difficult to read. Euron Greyjoy is in exile, beyond the reach of the Kingsmoot's judgment, and the men who acted for him faced no ironborn authority that could stop them. What the Kingsmoot refused him, he has taken another way. The Iron Islands law stopped him at Naga's Hill. The rope bridge did not. Balon died with his crown on. He had worn it for the better part of a year, recognized by Robb Stark in the mutual declaration that Theon spent 2 weeks drafting, and he died in the hall and on the island he had held for 10 years after a failed rebellion had taken everything else from him. He was not taken from Pike. He died there. That is what he wanted, in the end. Not glory and not rescue, but the crown on his head and the sea beneath him and the thing he built still intact. Whatever Euron intended to accomplish by killing him, he did not accomplish the thing the Kingsmoot refused him. Jon and Asha receive the news together in the solar above the harbor, and the room is briefly very still. Asha does not weep for Balon in public. She is not built for public grief in that way, and she has never pretended to be, and she does not change that now. She sits with the raven's message for a moment, and then sets it on the table and looks at it for a moment more, and then stands up and says, "There are things to be done," and begins doing them. Her chin is up, and her eyes are forward. Jon watches her from across the room. He knows the look. He wore it himself when word came to Castle Black about Ned, and he remembers what it cost to hold it and what it was protecting underneath. He does not say anything about this. She does not need him to say it. He picks up the second piece of paper from the table, the list of things that need handling, and starts on the first item. The succession does not need to be argued over because it was settled before Balon died. The captains who voted at Old Wick know what they voted for. The Kingsmoot was the Iron Islands' answer to the question of whether Jon and Asha's arrangement was legitimate by Ironborn principle, and the answer was yes. Euron killing Balon is the last move of a man who lost the argument. It is not a new argument. The captains do not call another Kingsmoot. Asha holds the hall that afternoon with the same directness she brings to everything else. She tells the captains what happened. She tells them what is going to happen next. She does not present it as a question. Meanwhile, a raven arrives from Robb at River Run. The letter is Robb's, brief and honest in the way Robb's letters are when he has something real to say. He has driven the Lannister forces out of the Riverlands. The war is not over. The Lannisters still hold King's Landing and the Iron Throne, but the North is secure. The Riverlands belong to House Tully again. The Iron Fleet is intact, and its captains are alive, and its ships can sail. He writes, "You gave me time and sea power when I had neither." He does not say thank you in so many words. He says, "I owe you a proper visit." He says it the way Robb says things he means but does not know how to say without sounding like something he is not. Jon reads it twice and passes it to Asha, who reads it once and sets it on the table with the other papers. "He will come," Jon says. "Good," she says. "We will feed him salt fish and show him the harbor. He can sleep in Theon's old room." Theon is in the hall when Asha calls for him, standing in the same position he stood in the first time Jon arrived at Pike and the first time Theon himself arrived after a decade at Winterfell. He is 21 to 23 years old now, depending on which side of the uncertainty his birth date falls on, and he is neither Greyjoy captain nor Stark ward. He is the son who built the peace and the brother who stood in the gap between two houses that neither one fully claimed. Asha looks at him across the table. "3 ships," she says. "Yours to command." She pauses. "Not charity. You know the water, and you know the politics, and you know what this arrangement cost to build. That is worth 3 ships. Theon looks at the table for a moment. Then he looks at her. "I will take them," he says. He does not say thank you either. He is learning. The afternoon light is going by the time Jon walks out to the rocks at the base of Pike's outer wall, where the sea comes in between the stone pillars and the salt spray has been at the stone for long enough that the base is white and the rock above it dark. He stands there with the wind off the water and looks out at the Iron Islands sea, which is the same color it always is, gray and cold and alive in a way that most bodies of water are not. Asha comes to stand beside him after a while, her black hair moving in the sea wind. She does not say anything immediately, and neither does he, and the silence between them has long since stopped being uncomfortable and become something else. Above them on the towers of Pike, Two banners move in the wind. The golden kraken on black, which is the Greyjoy sigil, and has flown here for as long as the towers have stood. And beside it the grey direwolf on white, which is the Stark sigil, and which has never flown here before now. They move together in the wind off the sea. Jon is 18. He is already older than he was before the wall, and he was already older then than his years. He gave up his name once and got a different one back, and came here, and what he is standing on is not what he thought he was building toward. But it is solid ground, and the sea is in front of him, and Asha is beside him, and both banners are his. Asha is 25 or 26. She is not married down from what she was. She is not smaller or less. She is married into something she helped shape and commands what she commanded before. And the captains of her ships call her by her name, and not by her husband's. They are looking at the same sea. The war continues elsewhere. The wall still stands, and what is north of it is still moving, and the silence that came back from the great ranging has not yet found its answer. But that is the thing about now. It is never the whole story. It is only the part of the story you are standing in. That's our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share,